I had a question. One of my professors a few years ago, kind of going back to the whole transgender issue.
Because there can be people with XXY, there can be Y chromosome inactivation. If you woke up and grew breasts today, would like them to be removed?
Right out the gate, this woman wants to challenge Frank's definition of a man and woman by giving him an intentionally incomplete biological definition of a man and a woman.
There are men.
Say that again?
Have you ever heard of gynecomastia?
Want to hear the absolute worst argument for transgender theory? Here it is.
I had it.
And so did you have that fixed?
Yes, I did.
And did that make you feel affirmed in your gender and comfortable in your body?
No, when I was in the Navy.
So she's kind of laying the groundwork for the perfect gotcha moment.
Nobody knows this, by the way.
She made the distinction between gender and sex. So sex is your biology, and that can't change. But gender, some of the things like how you dress or the different roles you take in society, that's what can be fluid and that's what you change. How would you respond to that distinction? And would you agree with it or disagree with it?
Well, the problem is, it seems like our culture is saying the biological sex means nothing. And following your heart, your gender thoughts are everything. And first of all, I don't think that's true. I think you can't change your biology. You can change your mind.
You can be a woman with female genitalia and be XY.
Historically, no. Gender and sex are the same thing. But if you want to say that some people...
Yeah, intersex people exist.
When you do have a truly intersexed person, at that point, either the parents or when they're old enough, they can decide which way they're going to orient themselves and they can get the appropriate surgery. But that's not what we're experiencing in our culture.
It's okay for people to decide their gender.
But for some reason, people will argue that this fact somehow validates transgenderism.
In that situation, but that's not what we're talking about in our culture.
Here's the problem.
While having a definite biology, have a different belief system about their, it depends. It depends on whether or not they're thinking their biology is what it is, and they just have what they think are feelings of the opposite sex. Okay, that would be called gender dysphoria. That's what that is, okay?
Trying to argue that because intersex people exist, this somehow validates the idea that a perfectly normal male or female can choose to be the opposite sex is completely illogical.
Not only from sports, but women's locker rooms where a man can just say, I feel like a woman today and go in. And this has created problems, obviously.
And to prove my point that race is nothing more than a social construct or a choice, I highlight that biracial people exist.
So people can say whatever they want, that there's a difference between the two.
The fact that intersex people exist at a rate of roughly 1 out of every 450 people.
I think that's the scientific definition, yes.
It's actually not.
Right.
1 in 100 people experience chromosomal differences in sex.
Okay.
Has nothing to do with the fact that currently 1 out of every 72 teenagers in the USA are identifying as transgender.
Okay, but not 1 in 100 have different genitalia or ambiguous genitalia.
I'm a biologist. I understand the biology. Are you saying that a woman is only a person who has 2 X chromosomes and a man who is someone who only has an X and a Y chromosome?
So to all the biologists out there, please stop trying to use a biological anomaly.
The way that this biology works is that you have genes. Those genes make proteins. Those proteins develop the traits that you define as men and women. They develop the features that you define as male. They develop the genitalia. But you can be a woman with female genitalia and be XY. You can be a man, but you can have XX chromosomes.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about, Grace. You're talking about a very rare condition known as intersexed.
It makes about as much sense as a white woman like me trying to argue that I was really an Asian woman trapped in a white woman's body.
I think, quite obviously, that you
validate.
What do you have to say for people who don't fit in your definition of man or woman?
And there it is.
We're not saying that they're not people, obviously. As I understand it, maybe you know more about it than me, when you do have a truly intersexed person.
It makes about as much sense as a white woman like me trying to argue that I was really an Asian woman trapped in a white woman's body.
At that point, either the parents or when they're old enough, they can decide which way they're going to orient themselves and they can get the appropriate surgery. But that's not what we're experiencing in our culture.
It's okay for people to decide their gender.
In that situation, but that's not what we're talking about in our culture. What you say is that's a situation that is not the norm.
It makes about as much sense as a white woman like me trying to argue that I was really an Asian woman trapped in a white woman's body.
You can't change your biology. You can change your mind. And if you're going to say there's a difference between your sex and your gender, then you are talking about what is called gender dysphoria.
And what do you say to those people?
Well, and too often, we Christians, since the culture is crumbling all around us, we're looked at as people who are just the naysayers,
And there it is.
And secondly, it creates all these difficulties in our society.
And there it is.
Tell us what you're against. You're against this, you're against that, you're against the Equality Act, you're against this other thing. Why don't you tell us what we're for? Okay, I'll tell you what we're for.
Psychiatric and social issue.
We're for the human flourishing. And the best way to flourish humans in a society is to recognize
psychiatric and social issue.
What we're talking about in our culture are people with perfectly normal functioning sexual organs trying to have them removed and trying to transition to another gender, which is impossible scientifically. And the relationship that does that is a man-woman relationship. It procreates and then it brings forth citizens who are going to be good citizens if they're brought up in a right home, and that perpetuates and stabilizes society.
So where's your development of this change?
Grace, because you don't perpetuate a society through homosexuality. Because the man-woman relationship over any other relationship, and the whole LGBTQ movement is moving in the opposite direction. It says children don't need a mother and a father. It says that homosexual relationships are just as good for everybody and society as heterosexual relationships, when in fact they can't be. And we are for every child having a mother and a father, because every child deserves a mother and a father. And even if you don't believe in all that, your identity is not in who you do. Your identity is the fact that you're a human being. The reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with is to perpetuate and stabilize society, not whether you have a desire to sleep with a same sex or opposite sex.
Have you ever doubted that you're a man?
Mm-hmm.
You've doubted that you...
Oh, have I ever doubted I'm a man? No, I have never doubted I'm a man.
Then what do you say to a transgender person who has never doubted their gender? You're saying...
Just biologically they can't be.
That we all change, and that obviously transgenderism is a product of some kind of phase, but you've never doubted that you're a man.
And so now people are going to interpret this as I'm attacking them individually. No, I don't buy the fact that your identity is what you do sexually.
That's right.
Your identity is not what you do sexually. Your identity, at least as we Christians believe, marriage to begin with, our identity is in Christ. Our identity is not what we do. Our identity is in who we are. The reason the government's involved in our identity is in Christ. Our identity is not what we do. Our identity is in who we are, in the sense that we've accepted the free gift of salvation, that we're God's children and we've been redeemed. Involved in marriage to begin with is to perpetuate and stabilize society. And by the way, the reason the government's involved in tax exemption, people are worried about tax exempt. No, we're not called to be tax exempt. We're called to be salt and light. The reason the government's involved in...
Statistics say that transgender people are more likely to commit suicide because of people like...
A white woman like me. And to prove my point, trying to argue that I was really an Asian woman trapped in a white woman's body.
Because of arguments that you make...
That race is nothing more than a social construct or a choice. I highlight that biracial people has nothing to do with the fact that currently 1 out of every 72 teenagers in the USA are identifying as transgender.
People are more likely to commit suicide. That is the surgery that's causing suicide.
No, it's not. What I'm saying is the surgery doesn't fix anything.
Invalid because of people like
a woman like me exist.
That's the point.
Amen.
So
I'm just saying that you implied.
Yes, I've had that myself and had it surgically removed when I was in the Navy. Yeah.
And do you feel more comfortable in your body and more affirmed in your gender because of that?
What I'm saying is, I'm not denying there are people truly with gender dysphoria. I've already said that. What I'm saying is,
all the, what do they say, the pastors that are, let's just say that very well known. A lot of them are kind of backing away from true Christianity because the fact that they don't want to be criticized by the world. I run into this problem a lot. And I always quoted Jesus Christ in Matthew 10:22, and Jesus Christ says that people will hate you because of me.
That's right.
And that blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for there shall be the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when they persecute you, say all kind of insult things because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great shall be your reward in heaven. I always recite that to them, and I think a lot of pastors forget about that.
Is the way out of that problem is not surgery according to the data. Okay? Psychiatry is the way out of that problem. Well, it wasn't a gender thing for me. It was the fact, well, I can't even get into it now because it had nothing to do with my gender. Okay? So it had to do with it had to do with the fact that it looked really odd. Let me just put it that way. Now I'm revealing I need a HIPAA form to sign here or something. Okay? But Grace, my point is, psychiatry is the way out of that, okay? It's practically the same rate, whether they have the surgery or not.
And there it is.
You just said that having that surgery made you feel better about yourself.
That has nothing to do with transgender surgery. I wasn't changing my sex. I was having breast tissue removed. Okay? I was always a man. Mm-hmm. Okay? So...
And say that I have XY chromosomes, but I'm born with female genitalia and female body types, but I believe I'm a man. Should I not be allowed to have that breast tissue removed?
As an adult, you can do whatever you want.
Yes, that's fine.
My problem is with the children. If we truly care about people, are we going to try and force them down a road, particularly as children, into a solution to a problem which is proven not to be a solution? That's where I'm having a real problem.
Is there a magic button at 18 that instantly makes you feel like you know who you are and absolutely what your gender is?
No, maybe it's later than 18. Okay? No, well, I think for women it's probably like 15. For men it's 37. No, well, men don't develop as quickly as women. All right? But no, my big problem, and I would say this to somebody who's 37, that the surgery does not appear to help anyone. And if you want more data on this, you can go to sexchangeregret.com. Sexchangeregret.com. But I wouldn't even be talking about this issue unless I thought the current way the culture's going is hurting people. And it is.
And there it is.
And actually, it turns out now in the experience that I've had, in fact, there's a gentleman from Baton Rouge right here. His name is Tony Perkins. He's the head of the Family Research Council up in D.C. And he says, if your pastor starts coming out and preaching truth on every issue, regardless of whether or not it intersects with politics, of course,
and there it is.
Everything intersects with politics now, right?
Definition of a man and a woman.
Everything's political. You know, when sex is political, like whether what your gender is or everything's politics, right? If you start speaking on those issues, you're going to lose a lot of people from your church. But he also said you're going to gain a whole lot more, and they're going to be even more devoted to the truth because people are screaming for leadership.
Right out the gate, this woman wants to challenge Frank's definition of a man and woman by giving him...
I think that's the scientific definition, yes.
It's actually not.
Biological definition of a man and a woman.
You can be a woman with female genitalia and be XY. Because there can be people with XXY, there can be Y chromosome inactivation.
Yeah, intersex people exist, but for some reason...
Then we're not doing justice. We're not being true shepherds. We're not doing justice to the scriptures.
And there it is, biological definition of a man and a woman. So
the reason the government's involved because...
Yeah, intersex people exist, but for some reason people will argue that this fact somehow validates transgenderism.
Well, when you do have a truly intersexed person, at that point, either the parents or when they're old enough, they can decide which way they're going to orient themselves and they can get the appropriate surgery. But that's not what we're experiencing in our culture.
It's okay for people to decide their gender.
In that situation, but that's not what we're talking about in our culture.
Here's the problem. Trying to argue that because intersex people exist, this somehow validates the idea that a perfectly normal male or female can choose to be the opposite sex is completely illogical. It makes about as much sense as a white woman like me trying to argue that I was really an Asian woman trapped in a white woman's body. And to prove my point that race is nothing more than a social construct or a choice, I highlight that
we are here to be shepherds as pastors, which means a lot of times we have to chase away the wolves.
I highlight that biracial people exist. The fact that intersex people exist at a rate of roughly 1 out of every 450 people.
We're going to hide from them. Why would I bring all this abuse on myself?
So to all the biologists out there, please use a biological anomaly to validate a psychiatric and social issue.
To be honest with you, okay? Because
To do with the fact that currently 1 out of every 72 teenagers in the USA are identifying as transgender.
our job is not to get numbers. Our job is to preach the truth. It needs to be said more. That's a very good word. And too often we don't want to chase away the wolves because we're afraid that people are going to leave our church and leave the results to God.
Here's the problem. Trying to argue that because intersex people exist, this somehow validates the idea.
How should we think about these things? What does God say about these things? What does the Bible say about these things?
To use a biological anomaly to validate a psychiatric and social issue.
I'd just like to say that I disagree.
And there it is.
And just leave the results to God.